Owen, and you're watching Beat Cancer with me. A little more than a year ago, I was diagnosed with stage 4 terminal cancer. The doctors told me that there was nothing that I could do, and they sent me home to die. That's when I found Jane McLelland's book, How to Starve Cancer. I also went through her course, her online course called How to Starve Cancer. And in just over a year, I've been able to beat back my cancer to where it's barely recognizable on a scan. In fact, at my last doctor's appointment, my doctor told me to live my life. She said, what you have is barely cancer. Jane McLelland in her book, How to Starve Cancer, was a huge part of that. And today, I am thrilled to be interviewing one of my heroes and a leader in the metabolic integrative cancer movement, Jane McLelland. Jane, welcome to the show. It's so good to have you.
Oh, and your intro was absolutely awesome. I am so thrilled for you that you've done so well. That's just incredible. Thank you so much for that intro, and well done. Well done.
Yes.
But you know, it's not easy, and people don't realize when you have cancer, it's a lot of hard work. You can't just expect the conventional treatments to work. You've got to look way beyond that, particularly if you're stage 4, and to have actually got it to that stage where it's manageable and the doctor's telling you that, that's incredible. So well done. And you know, people don't understand the effort that's involved, really, because there's a lot of aspects to it.
There really is. And I'd love to dig into those today. We have a ton of people watching live. And so if you guys have questions for Jane, ask them in the comment area. We're going to do our best to get to all of them. But let's start by talking a little bit about stage 4 cancer and how to starve cancer. What does that mean? And how can a cancer patient use that to beat back their cancer?
Okay, well, traditionally, people immediately think of diet as the big aspect of starving your cancer, and it does play a huge role in what you do. And the most recognized anti-cancer diet for starving cancer is, of course, the ketogenic diet. And that can work very effectively to begin with for a great many people. Is that something that you did?
Yeah, I'm a plant-based, like keto vegan diet is what I do. And I'm fasting like 20 hours a day. I eat a keto vegan meal at night, and then I might eat some fruit on the weekends. But that's only now. I didn't do that for the first year.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think actually being really strict with yourself for a certain period of time to begin with is actually quite critical. I mean, they've showed that the ketogenic diet after about 30 days starts to not be so effective. And this is where you need to be looking at adding other things into it. So you can't rely just on the diet on its own. And that was something that I always recognized. But what I've done is I've researched the hell out of cancer and actually try to work out the key metabolic feeding routes that cancer uses so that you can work out then different supplements that can assist your diet and different off-label drugs. So these are old low toxicity drugs. So they're not, you know, a lot of people are a little bit scared about drugs, particularly when it comes to cancer. You know, the last thing, if you're on chemo or immunotherapy, a lot of people are very worried about taking extra drugs, but these are low toxicity things. But I put together my own cocktail when, of course, I had stage 4 and I knew it was coming back in my bones, and I had been doing the diet. I've been doing intravenous vitamin C. I had been doing the supplements, but they weren't enough. And that's when I added these off-label drugs, which was that extra bit that the cancer needed. And I think a lot of people who are, you know, they might try the natural stuff and it might work for a certain period of time. And, you know, why not try all the natural stuff? But really, is it going to be enough to get rid of stage 4? And stage 4, doctors see that as incurable. So it's really spectacular what you've done and spectacular what I've done.
Yeah.
And I see a lot of people doing this now with stage 4. I mean, we're not alone. I think the whole off-label movement has really caught on. I'm really pleased. I started up my Facebook group in about 2015 because nobody knew about these off-label drugs. I was kind of trying to shout it from the rooftop, but nobody's really listening. So I in 2015, I just brought a few, I sort of try to gather a few people together on my Facebook group, and it's now 55,000 cancer patients on there, which is terrific. So quite a big following now.
And I would say that group was a big part of my success. Kelly Turner wrote in her book, Radical Remission, that you need to be in a community of survivors. And the first page in your book, which said, go join my Facebook group. And in your Facebook group, you have this.
Number one.
Yeah. And I thought it was so smart because you're bringing people from a physical book to a digital community where I immediately found positive progress stories. When I first got your book, there was this element of, will it really work for me? And then I met so many cancer survivors and cancer thrivers in your group that it built my belief, and it caused me to kind of like start the supplements and start the diet plan without just trust, just faith. And I think that's one of the big reasons. If you guys don't have Jane's book and you're not a member of that community, please go to these links, buy the book. The book has links to Facebook, and she's also got an online course on how to do this. But I would love to hear, more from you on, what it means to starve cancer and what cancer patients should be doing right now, like immediately. What are some of those first steps?
First step is to find yourself an integrative doctor who can actually prescribe some of these drugs. And that's the tricky thing. I mean, we don't have that many doctors who are able to do that. I'm very, very delighted that the Care Oncology Clinic started. I discovered them, and that was kind of why it was sort of, they were doing a cocktail almost identical to the one that I put together. So it was like amazing to me. And I've been singing their praises ever since, because they've done something quite unique in that they've started this. They've got two oncology clinics now. So one in London, one in the US, and people can just enroll. It's a study, so it's looking at 4 or 5. They sometimes add the flarin in as well, which is a non-steroidal anti-inflammatory. But they're looking at essentially a cocktail of 4 drugs to see how people react with different cancers. And essentially, it's working on the metabolism, and the metabolism is pretty standard across all cancers, that they use similar pathways. Now, they will have dominant paths, so a different dominant pathway for different cancers. So, for example, estrogen positive breast cancer, for example, actually uses the OXPHOS pathway more than it does the glycolysis pathway. And these are little tiny things that you kind of have to work out about your cancer. So it's not just a straightforward, just have the cocktail, that will work for you. Actually, you need to work out something called your metabolic phenotype. How does it actually feed? Which pathways on my map? And I've got this triangular map called my Metro map in my book, which has those fuel lines coming in on each side. And I split it into sort of the 3 macros in the diet: the fat, the carb, and the protein. So on one side, you've got the glucose, which is the carb. On the other side, there are several amino acids that cancer will use, but essentially glutamine is kind of the big one if you switch and use. And then you've got fat. And a lot of people don't realize that fat is actually an energy source for the cancer as well. A lot of physicians are actually just focused on the glycolysis, focused on glutaminolysis, which is a breakdown of glucose, breakdown of glutamine to actually feed the cancer. And they kind of focus on that as being the only 2 critical things you really need to look at. But actually, not the case. There are lots of other pathways that really support the cancer. And if you stop one pathway, it reworks itself and goes up another route. And that was the whole premise of what I researched. And it became more and more obvious to me. The more I looked through the research, it was lots of aha moments as I came across kind of realizing that if you block things like mTOR, it'll make autophagy, which most people think is a good thing, but actually in cancer, the cancer will use autophagy as a different method to feed itself. So everybody needs to realize that autophagy isn't always something that you want, or you want certain parts of the autophagy, but not other parts. It's actually a process. Autophagy is a process. So it's actually just trying to work out all the different things that the cancer needs. It's unfortunate that cancer isn't straightforward. I wish it were. I wish it was just a very simple, just do the keto diet. Here's your, here's your list of foods, and here's a few supplements, few drugs, boom, that's it. And it would be great if that worked for everybody. Not the case.
Yeah, it's and I had to dial in my own cancer. I did an animal-based keto diet, and I got maintenance, right? Like management. The disease didn't grow, but it didn't shrink either. Then I switched to plant-based keto and added fasting, and that's when dramatic reduction started to happen. And this was extended fasting, 3 days at a time. But what I did notice is that I was listening to Dr. Thomas Seyfried, and he said very emphatically, he's quite a character. He said every cancer cell that he's ever tested, he goes, you can't say every, but he says every cancer cell I've ever tested has responded to a very similar protocol to yours, right? It's diet, fasting, but then also off-label prescriptions. He calls it DAWN. It's something a little bit different.
Yeah. That's the glutamine inhibitor. It's actually quite a powerful drug, and actually could be potentially quite. I worry about that being a little bit too toxic for people.
Yes.
He doesn't really also recognize the fat pathways as an alternative source of energy. He kind of ignores the fat almost entirely, which I find strange. But anyway, he's definitely about the glucose, definitely about the glutamine, and he kind of thinks just doing those two is enough. But I do know that there are, and glycolysis doesn't happen in all the cancer cells. It doesn't. It just doesn't. You actually have something called the reverse Warburg going on, and this is what people don't understand, is that I think people know what the Warburg effect is. So that's glycolysis. That's when your cancer cells are fermenting. So if you go for a run and your muscles aren't getting enough oxygen, they produce lactic acid. Well, your cancer cells will do the same thing. They will be producing this lactic acid even when there's oxygen in the environment. So they go through this fermentation process, but not all cancer cells do that. And as you get this symbiotic effect where you've got some cancer cells doing this glycolysis, producing lots of lactic acid, but that lactate is actually then used as fuel for its neighboring cell. So the other cell will be using oxphos, which is the normal way of using creating ATP.
Right.
So it's actually using that in order to produce the energy. And cancer is all about using lots of energy. And actually, to get rid of cancer, we need to blunt it. We need to stop that energy production in different ways. And actually, oxphos, if you block the glycolysis, it'll use that oxphos, which is the traditional Krebs cycle, far more. And what people don't realize is that you get this biogenesis of mitochondria. So you get lots of sprouting of more mitochondria in order to provide more of that oxphos and ATP.
Yeah.
And you need to blunt that as well, which is why things like antibiotics, the doxycycline, and in fact berberine work, because they are blunting, because those mitochondria are like ancient bacteria. That's why they work on those mitochondria. And lots of people say, oh well, it's toxic for the mitochondria to be using doxycycline or metformin, but you've got to look at berberine as well. If you're going to include metformin in that list, you've then got to include berberine. But actually, you need to blunt that effect that's going on in the mitochondria. Otherwise, you still have too much energy going on. And Professor Lisanti, who's a very renowned scientist in the UK here at I'm actually now in New York.
Yeah.
But back in the UK, he's looked into the whole energy very, very deeply, and it's all about producing lots and lots of energy. And he's looked at, like I said, with the estrogen positive breast cancer ladies, actually, you've got to be blunting that OXPHOS very strongly. And there are other cancers that use this OXPHOS very strongly as well. You know, you've got to look at the entire spectrum of what you're doing in order to make sure that you can switch off the cancer effectively.
You know, you sound like a doctor. Dr. Nasha Winters, who's a leader in the metabolic space, has become a friend of mine. We talk on Instagram, and she's a doctor. She's very sciencey. You are speaking the same way. And for those of you that are watching us live or watching us on the replay, I want to encourage you to ask any questions you might have about some of these questions, OXPHOS, and if you're not caught up on all of these things, you should know about these things. And we have a question about berberine. I wanted to ask you because you just brought it up. Judith asks, my doctor thinks that adding berberine to chemo would make the chemo too strong, and would therefore be harmful on my body. What do you, Jane, think of what that of the effects of berberine on chemo?
Okay, well, I use berberine with chemo, all right, and it actually has a very beneficial effect. Not only is it producing that starving effect, so in effect, you're doing like Volta Longo's starve before, it's actually doing it with the use of a supplement. You're starving the cancer in the same way. So you get that weakening of the cancer cells so that the chemo will actually be much more effective. And the other thing that berberine will do is that it's actually, it inhibits the chemo from leaving the cell too early. It sort of shuts down some of these transports. So it actually holds the chemo inside the cell for longer. And this is important because chemo will only kill off a cancer cell when it's dividing. So if it misses it, if it's not dividing when you're actually having the chemo, then it's not going to work. Okay, so actually holding it inside the cell for that little bit longer. And this is why this is same effect with verapamil, which is what Professor Ben Williams used.
Yeah.
You know, the guy who got better from GBM, brain cancer.
Yeah.
He used verapamil, very much the same effect, that it holds the chemo inside the cell for that little bit longer. So I can't say to ignore your doctor's advice.
But you want to say that, though. But you want to say that, though, you know, because, you know, I've said,
look, this is all my own research. This is everything that I'm talking to you about now is stuff that I have researched and learned for myself. I've not had anybody teach me any of this. I've had to work it out all on my own over the last, you know, I mean, I got the last time I had cancer was in 2004. You know, and at that point, and I kept learning all the way through. So from 1994, when I first got it, 99 when it spread to my lungs, and then, you know, these bone marrow issues that I was getting, the dysplasia, the myelodysplasia, all of that was stuff that just taught me more and more and just pushed me to a next level. So like, right, this isn't enough. I need to up my game, you know. And what happens with cancer as it progresses and becomes more aggressive, you kind of have to up your game with it. And people kind of think, oh, well, that worked last time, so I'll just do that again. You know, sometimes you've just got to look at adding a little bit more to that in order to get around it and to actually encourage that cell death. And sometimes just going natural, I'm afraid to say, isn't enough, you know, because some of these off-label drugs can be very, very, very effective. I know people have issues with statins. They have, you know, Siegfried even has issues with metformin, and he says that it's going to damage your mitochondria. Well, you need to blunt that OXPHOS, and he doesn't recognize that. And also, you know, and that worries me. If you look at metformin, one of the brilliant reasons that it works is because it blunts something called gluconeogenesis in the liver. So if you're going to start, if you're going to go through a keto diet, which is what Siegfried suggests you do, the liver will compensate by pumping out, by converting fat into sugar. So you then raise your level. You don't actually get down to that sort of low glucose level unless you block gluconeogenesis in the liver. And that's where metformin is really, really effective, as well as working on sort of the electron transport chain as well. And blunting the OXPHOS, you know, that's what it's doing. It's actually starving the cancer that way by blocking the access that the cancer has to the sugar. So really critically important. And metformin has been researched for decades, you know, and people worry that it's going to be damaging for the liver. It's not damaged. It's actually positively beneficial for the liver. And if you look at fatty liver disease, metformin is brilliant for that. You know, just I think people are worried, you know, and I think there's a lot of rumors about off-label drugs doing more harm than good and all this sort of thing. You know, I worry that people are being put off the drugs that are actually going to help them. And they need to really be encouraged that actually they talk to these doctors, talk to the care oncology, and actually get some sense from people who've actually done this for years, you know. And
I tell people all the time that I have cured more cancer than your doctor. And that's a little bit facetious, but what I saw that from the doctor community, the medical oncology community, is they had a track record of failure, is that more people are sick and die in that space. And I didn't want to be sick and I didn't want to die. And when I found your community, what I found were people that were healthy and optimistic and outliving their prognoses and even reversing totally their cancer. And so I go, which community do I want to be a part of? Because you become the 5 people you hang around. So are you going to hang around, you know, balding, you know, please forgive me guys, but you know, this dying cancer patient, or are you going to surround yourself with thriving cancer patients? And, you know, I did 10 cycles of chemo. I had cancer twice. This is my recurrence. I got the recurrence. They told me there's nothing that can be done. But we'll give you this chemo as a consolation prize. And so being afraid, and I did 10 cycles of chemo, but there was that day where we got our 3rd great scan and we go, okay, is the chemo hurting my ability to thrive? Or is it actively participating in my tumor reduction? And because of what you teach and what you've discovered, we decided to take that leap of faith. And since then, that was back in October. Since then, it's been progressive reduction scans. To my last scan was like no metabolic activity. You know, like she said that they could be tumors or they could just be the dead shells of your tumor. She said, we won't know until you do your follow-up scans or whatever. So that's a very exciting place to be. And I wanted to kind of ask you this question. Tim Son asked this question, who is a major survivor. He says, are there any cancers that starving the cancer won't work for? Is starving cancer sort of like a lucky if it works kind of thing? What are your thoughts on that?
My thoughts are there are certain cancers that are trickier. So sarcomas, for example, don't tend to respond so well to the COC protocol to begin with. And I think they definitely need extra input on top. So things like propranolol, which has been shown to work. It's a growth inhibitor, particularly good at stopping VEGF and other things, you know, the vascular endothelial growth factor. And putting the brakes on it, because you need to look at the growth factors as well as looking at blocking the metabolic route, you know, and but you can slow it right down. And I have seen sarcomas respond a lot more to immunotherapies if you can get them right. But it's actually what I'm doing at the moment is looking into ferroptosis, because ferroptosis works better for things like sarcomas than just doing the straightforward protocol with the COC drugs, for example, and rhabdomyosarcomas, which are almost impossible, and mesotheliomas, things like that, which are nasty. You know, my
nephew survived rhabdomyosarcoma, 8 years old.
Who did?
My nephew.
Wow.
Yeah, he's 21 now.
Brilliant. Well, that's great. That's terrific. But that, when it starts getting going and if it spreads, that's horrendous, particularly as it affects young people. So many boys.
Do you think that the keto diet and similar approaches would be more beneficial in childhood cancers in general? Obviously, there's a lot of nuances there, But what I see is when a friend or family member, God forbid, but it happens, their child gets cancer, it seems like there's this immediate like, oh, they're young and they're healthy, so pound them with chemo, give them surgery. And I'm like, that is their childhood. Do you think that children would respond to COC and diet and the metabolic cancer therapies as well?
Absolutely, no question. I mean, if you look at the cancer that is the most curable, it's a childhood cancer called acute lymphoblastic leukemia. And this works because they added a metabolic drug. Back in the 90s, they added, asparaginase, which blocks the uptake of glutamine. And they try to adapt this to make it something that, because I think it's the metabolic nature of kids that they can tolerate these things much more.
Right.
So they can take the asparaginase, but as soon as you're an adult, you can't. And I think our metabolism changes so that we can't. And some kids don't respond to the asparaginase. But the cure rate went up from something like 20% to 90%, literally as soon as they introduced that metabolic drug. It was like game changer.
Okay.
Massive. And this is where we need to go with everything else. We need these metabolic drugs. We need to find the keys to what really, and we know that those leukemias are actually driven by glutamine. And knowing that, you know, that is its major fuel, and actually blocking it with that drug, big effects, you know. So that just goes to prove it. And I think if the COC could actually provide their drugs to under 18s, unfortunately, there are so many rules and things in place, to, you know, and because the drugs aren't tested regularly in kids, there's a lot of hesitation to actually give these drugs to kids. Whereas, you know, statins are actually, they have been tested and found to be safe for kids. Metformin, they're starting to dish out metformin to kids with type 2 diabetes.
I'm not surprised. I knew you were going to say that. I knew you were going to say that.
It's a shocking state of affairs where we have so many obese kids now who actually need to take metformin.
Because of diet, because of the standard Western diet. And, you know, it's funny. I know that we had a great question come in from one of our viewers who was talking about how it's hard to approach people. Like sometimes somebody will tell me, my mom got cancer, I have cancer. What are you doing? And I said, I'm eating plants all the time and taking care of my health. And sometimes I would say more often than not, it's like, I'm not going to do that. I'm just going to go with chemo. I'm just going to go with immunotherapy. And it's like part of that same quick fix mentality. Like, I'm just going to eat this burger, this pizza. It's quick fix. It's quick, but it's destroying your body. And then when you get cancer from that or another metabolic disease, you go, well, I'm just going to get another quick fix, another pill or something. And we're not looking at the big picture of metabolism. And that's what I wanted to ask about is cancer a metabolic disease or is it a genetic disease? And can you sort of like unpack that difference for us?
Well, you know, traditionally the oncologists always class it as a genetic disease. It can start as a genetic disease if you have a very high dose of radiation, for example, and it damages your DNA to the point where it actually causes mutations. But generally speaking, it's secondary to the tumor microenvironment. So it's what's around the tumor that actually sends signals, epigenetic signals, into the cell. And then the cell starts to produce this abnormal amount of fuel, or it starts to behave abnormally. And this then triggers more changes inside, more changes to the microenvironment. It changes the structure around the cell, produces something called the stroma. It then produces the cancer. So it starts off, most cancers, 99% of them will start off as a metabolic problem, and the genes change because you have all this acetyl in the cell. So that changes the histones which hold the DNA together. They loosen, and then you get all these mutations occurring. But that's secondary to what's happened with the metabolism and the tumor microenvironment. All about what nature would say, the terrain.
Yes.
And it's all about getting the terrain back to normal and actually trying to focus on making sure that that is really as anti-cancer as you can make it. and having low glucose in the area. And
Yes.
actually, with some cancers, you need to cut down the availability of protein. It's very hard to cut down glutamine in your, it's the most abundant amino acid, and people worry about having to cut out so much. But actually, with the glutamine, you need to stop the transport from across the membrane from the blood into the cancer cell. That's more important actually than stopping glutamine in your system almost. So
Oh, wow.
green tea is particularly good for that. That's why I hope you're drinking green tea there, Owen.
Oh, yeah. I drink green tea and I take EGCG all the time.
Yeah.
In fact, that's one of the supplements. I kind of go in and out of supplements, and I posted, like so many other people in your group, I posted my supplement regimen, and it's changed over time. I took ellagic acid for a long time, but as I've brought strawberries back into my diet, I've decreased the ellagic acid, right? And I've even decreased the amount of EGCG I was taking because I've been drinking more green tea. And it's all part of like listening to your body and sort of understanding. My body still responds tremendously well to the keto diet and really a low caloric diet. I probably only put down 800 to 1,000 calories a day. And I hope I look good, right? I feel.
You don't look like you're wasting away to me at all. You look terrific.
Thank you. Thank you. I feel that way. And you look fantastic as well. And you listen to your body. Once you learn how to listen to your body. Yeah. Because you have to kind of get past that. My body says I'm hungry, so I need a burger. You say, okay, why am I hungry? First of all, I want to say welcome to Julie. Julie, you're going to make me cry. My aunt was recently diagnosed with stage 4. Or excuse me, she was recently diagnosed with breast cancer, and she's here. She's here right now. We told her about you. We told her everything that we're doing, and she goes, well, I want to kind of follow the doctor first, right, and see what the doctor says. And they did this thing that was like, oh, quick surgery and you're out of here. Then she got there and it's like, oh, well, surgery, but 6 rounds of chemo and you're out of here. And I'm so glad that you're here, Julie, listening to this interview because it is so, so, so important. Let's talk about ferroptosis. What is ferroptosis? And tell me how this plays into the killing cancer once and for all environment.
Okay. Well, there are 2 phases really to my approach to getting rid of cancer. One is the starve approach, so you're actually blocking all those metabolic fuel lines. And the other is the pro-oxidant, so you're actually boosting oxygenation into the cell. And this is where we can use iron, which cancer loves. And the more aggressive you have a cancer, the more it's using iron. So the really nasty ones like pancreatic, triple negative breast cancer are particularly, and the rhabdomyosarcoma, as I mentioned, mesothelioma, all the really tricky ones very often have huge need for iron. So this is something that it grabs onto and uses, but you can use that as a way to kill it. So this is something that's being developed at the moment, the whole ferroptosis treatment. I'm hoping I will have a clinic one day in the UK. I'm working with an Egyptian doctor to maybe try and get this set up. Maybe by the end of the year, I don't know. It'd be terrific if we can get that organized, because things like pancreatic cancer need that option. They need to have something beyond what they're offered at the moment, because effectively they're just offered as sort of, a 2 or 3 month lifeline, and that's it. That's that's all that they'll normally have. And nasty treatments, nasty chemo and ripple surgeries and things, and it doesn't tend to it doesn't work in most cases. You've really got to look beyond. And this is where ferroptosis is using the iron, and you have things like intravenous vitamin C, which people need to realize that at high dose in your body, it produces hydrogen peroxide around the cancer, and this is what triggers the release of with the iron. And then you have things like artemisinin, which again releases oxygen in the cell, and so you get this release of oxygen. The cancer doesn't like it because it hates oxygen. It loves to ferment. And so it's killing off those nasty cancer stem cells in the system. And, you know, I've seen some pretty dramatic results just from people doing a partial approach to ferroptosis. You don't need to, you know, you probably need to have a mix of approaches, because we know at stage 4, cancer becomes resistant to apoptosis, which is the normal way of the cell dying. But ferroptosis is a different approach, and the cancer doesn't know how to, well, it learns to defend itself against it. And it's a bit like my Metro map, where it's got these salvage routes, these escape routes that it can go through. I've got a whole long list in my second edition of these escape routes again for the ferroptosis, so that it, you know, and CBD, for example, is important for blocking those escape routes, because every cancer cell will give off these little things called exosomes, and these are little packets of microRNA and glucose and things to actually go off to distant areas and then send messages to those distant areas to break down, produce more glutamine, and it helps to get rid of excess iron as well, so that it doesn't go through this ferroptosis process. So what CBD does is it stops these exosomes sending out those messages. So that's why it is so important actually to add CBD with pretty much every cancer, I'd say. I mean, it's not something I've discussed a lot in the past, but since I've looked into ferroptosis, I realized that the CBD is probably, its greatest effect is probably stopping these exosomes that people don't understand about yet.
What would that dosage be of CBD? Is that like what is it, like a millimeter? Like, how much is the droplets?
Yeah,
like,
it's sort of 1,000 milligrams, I think. Yeah.
Like once a day, twice a day?
I only do it once a day. Put my little thing back there by my bed.
Because otherwise you might be like, you know, just
yeah,
chilling.
but then of course I'm not, you know, I don't have active cancer. I think I might, you know, when I was going through cancer, I did up quite a lot of the stuff that I took. Like, I overdosed a little bit on some things.
Yeah. Well, hey, don't we all?
As long as I knew I wasn't doing anything too toxic, that was, you know, I am Maracas. That was my nickname.
Look,
So,
I did the same thing with MCT oil. You know, I got so into keto, and I'm still very into keto. But I do flex out of it from time to time, and I get yams and I get natural foods.
You're doing the intermittent fasting. So that, you know, that I actually rate intermittent fasting above keto, because it is blocking pretty much everything, your fat, your glutamine, and the glucose as well, because you're just reducing all 3 macros to the cancer cell. It cannot get, you know, if you're intermittent fasting, it is being starved at that point. And one of the great things that I realized was that metformin, if you take it when you're intermittent fasting, that's when it's blocking the gluconeogenesis, and that's why it makes it work that much better. Most people take metformin with, and they're told, because traditionally that's how diabetics are told to take it, they're told to take it with a meal. But actually, when they've looked at metformin when you're fasting, brilliant. So metformin on its own doesn't look like it works particularly well, but you do it with intermittent fasting, suddenly you get this massive increase in effect because it's blocking that gluconeogenesis.
That is that 1-2 punch. Those strategies are, I think, what really helped me get such great results in the beginning. And I did. I mean, I was so depressed. In fact, I found your book in this moment of sunshine in between the depression. I was just sitting on my couch depressed. And all of a sudden, this still small voice comes into my head and said, go find a cancer book. And I was filled with hope, and I was filled with optimism. I ordered 2 books. I ended up sending the other one back because it just felt cheap. But yours was the other one, and it began to change everything. And you start to learn about like fasting with chemo and metformin with fasting, which is something I just learned today. Can I ask you about metformin and berberine? Should you take those together? Does one replace the other? Where does berberine fit into a metformin schedule?
Berberine actually is potentially more toxic on the liver than metformin, and because it interferes with a lot of those liver enzymes. Metformin, by the way, will actually reduce your B12, so you do need to supplement a little bit with B12. Just
I take a
to,
B complex personally, yeah, and I take a B12 with that, yeah.
But the berberine actually has more effects on more of the fat pathways.
So for cancers that are more fat driven, so melanomas, prostate,
some of the breast cancers are very heavily fat driven. You probably need to be putting a little bit of berberine in there, or niacin. They both work on the fat pathways, or both. I think niacin is a very useful supplement as well. But the berberine, as you know, blocks many of the similar pathways on my Metromap. When I was looking into it, I kept on coming across and thought, wow, no wonder I did so well, like the Care Oncology Clinic. I was using berberine instead of metformin. I only discovered metformin in about 2007, and that's when I added it into my protocol. I do tend to alternate. So metformin wasn't an original part of my protocol. It came in later, and at that point I didn't have detectable cancer. So I've been alternating a little bit. I think if it depends on the type of cancer and how aggressive it is, and whether your liver enzymes are okay. Keep an eye on them.
All the more reason
can also interact a little bit as well, because they're both reducing the fat. So yeah.
All the more reason to have an integrative doctor, and that's why that first step, like you said earlier, is so key.
Yeah.
We've got a lot of questions on what do I do if, and so I'd like to ask you that question. First, I'd like to ask about the Care Oncology Clinic. Talk to me about what is the Care Oncology Clinic, and why is it helpful for every cancer patient in the US or the UK to know about them? Is there any hope for our Australian friends, our Canadian friends? Any thoughts there? Talk to us about the Care Oncology Clinic.
They set up in about, I think they originally set up in about 2014. I didn't discover them until 2015. And at that point, they had just launched and they'd got their study running. They'd only seen a handful of patients. I just happened to read about it in the Daily Telegraph and leap with joy. But they produce, they're producing these studies. They've only done GBM so far, but I think they're going to publish a study on triple negative breast cancer. But effectively, they've been doubling the survival time for GBM, although that's improving as they get patients to know about it earlier. They're going to the Care Oncology Clinic a little bit earlier, so the results therefore are going to be better. And they've got several patients for GBM into full remission, and triple negative, they're getting good results as well. Statins are particularly useful actually for triple negative breast cancer because they use the mevalonate pathway quite heavily, whereas other breast cancer patients actually will use the what's known as the SREBP2, which is the other cholesterol pathway, more heavily. It's actually trying to work out which, the balance, but you've got to be blocking both ideally. There are natural supplements, and I talk about this a lot more in my second edition. I've got far more natural alternatives in my second edition book than my first edition book. And it's another 80 pages in there. I've chopped down some of my story, the first part, I've chopped out things like my Dragon's Den experience, which is your equivalent of Shark Tank. I've kind of cut that down. It's not really that relevant. It was, it was relevant to me at the time because it was such a stressful thing. But,
of course.
but really, so I've added, there's an awful lot more padded into the second part of my second edition. A lot more science, I'm afraid, in there, and my Metromap has got a few more pathways on it than it did before.
Good. I'm glad it's updated. It's more relevant. I mean, absolutely huge.
So, like the fat transport, the glutamine transport, lactate transport, they're all on there as well, and they're really critical to stop the access of those because lactate is a fuel. The GLUT1 receptor through to GLUT5, they're all receptors for glucose, but you've got receptors for amino acids, you've got receptors for the fat, the CD36 as well, which has been shown to be upregulated. If you're on a ketogenic diet, the CD36 is something you should be blocking. Absolutely. Are you?
Am I?
Yeah. Blocking the CD36. Do
you know that's a great question. I kind of took everything. And my integrative doctor, who I found from going to the Care Oncology Clinic, told me massive action gets massive results. And so if it was in your book, I did it. And it was probably months later.
Are you taking Dan Shen?
What's that?
Dan Shen.
No. What's that?
Oh, you need to be on Dan Shen. It's red sage.
Okay.
Okay. Chinese herb. Stick that in your list, because if you're on a keto diet, that's one of the things it switches to using to pull in fat where it can. Okay. And this is where we need to understand that fat can be an issue. And it is a reason why the ketogenic diet sometimes fails with the CD36.
Yeah.
So Dan Shen.
It's added to, well, I wrote red sage because I did get what is it called? The reishi mushrooms. Like I take that supplement, but there's an Asian market down the way. So I went there and actually got reishi mushrooms. They're actually like hard as wood, believe it or not. And they take a while to cook, kind of bitter and whatnot. But you know, I love to go in between the supplements and then the natural food source as well. Same with the turmeric, right? Like right now I'm taking a turmeric supplement, but I just recently was blending turmeric in with my shakes. And so I just kind of bouncing back and forth, keeping my body guessing. But I really wanted to emphasize, because we had a lot of questions about where do I find an integrative doctor, or how do I get a telephone consult? I want all of you who have got those questions to go to careoncologyclinic.com. At the top of the website, there's a UK and a United States flag. Click the one that's best for you. Australia or Canada, they have very clearly labeled pathways for you. Set an appointment. I personally have met with Dr. Meakin and Dr. Tan. They have both blown me away. One of the biggest things that I loved about Care Oncology Clinic is that their patients are still alive and they're thriving. And Dr. Tan was so casual. She's like, oh yeah, I met a person who beat that. Oh yeah, I know one of my patients is 20 years since that. And she was just so confident. Dr. Meakin's a little more soft-spoken, but he writes a blog. He actually participates in the metabolic community. So I want you guys all to know about Care Oncology Clinic. I also want you all to know about IntegrativeMedica.com. That is my integrative doctor. He's based in Salt Lake, and people come from all around to see him. Although if you're too far, he will do virtual consults with you, which is really positive. And then Dr. Terry Harmon is another doctor that is, he's really been my nervous system doctor, doing a lot of stuff on the vagal nerve and de-stressing so that stress won't feed the cancer. So I wanted to put some of those things out there right off the bat. For any of our new viewers, people logging in for the first time, Jane, can you outline for us the major pathways and the supplements / the off-label protocols that will block them to some degree?
Okay, well, it's a bit more complicated. Can I also add that if people want to look for other doctors all around the world, so these are doctors who will actually prescribe the off-label drugs. I've got a list of naturopaths as well who will be supportive of all of those things. But if you want those off-label drugs, then I'm sort of gathering a list of doctors beyond the Care Oncology as well. And you'll find those on my website, which is howtostarvecancer.com.
Okay, let's put that up right now.
There's a tab for doctors, and you can find many doctors.
Inside your course, or is that like in a blog?
No, it's just a drop-down tab. If you look at my website, there's a whole load of tabs across the top of it, and there's one for doctors at the top there.
Okay, let's take a look at that so that everybody can see. howtostarvecancer.com. That's howtostarvecancer.com. And we've got home, about Jane, the book, success stories, and then doctors. Is this what you're talking about?
Correct.
Fantastic.
Yeah. So click on there, and there's a list of doctors, including the Care Oncology, obviously.
Okay, great.
So they're a bit busy. So
don't wait, don't hang around.
Yeah.
I think my book has just tipped some sort of international kind of, I don't know, wave of interest in off-label drugs, and I've been delighted. I've seen a bit of a pushback against that because I think people are saying, oh, they're dangerous, all the rest of it. So, but anyway, I am delighted that I can see the progress for so many people, and you know, I know it's not going to stop. Nobody's going to be able to slow this down now. This has triggered a revolution, and I'm absolutely delighted about that. But it's actually understanding. What I really want people to understand is that you need to really understand how your cancer works. If you want to beat it, you have to understand it, and you have to understand what drives it, what feeds it. And this is the critical bit. And they're all, you know, every cancer is slightly different. I am going to try and create an app at some point, and it's proving much more of a headache and expense than I thought. But anyway, but you know, I do want to make it potentially a lot easier for people to try and work out their cocktail. But even so, people still have to have confidence and faith in what they're doing. And you won't have that confidence and faith unless you understand how it's working. Just blindly taking CBD because somebody tells you to take CBD or do the ketogenic diet, you might have some concept of it starving the glucose, but you really, you know, you need to know a little bit more. And knowledge is power, and it's just so true when it comes to cancer. I just buried myself in as much research as I possibly could when I had cancer. That was the only way I knew I could get through it, and I was absolutely convinced the answers were out there somewhere. And that's why I kept looking and kept looking, and I kept digging up things about drugs that hadn't been used for, you know, decades and stuff, and then persuading doctors to, they'd never done that before. They'd never used these off-label drugs for a cancer patient. I had to persuade them to, you know, to write out these scripts for me. And they did, thank God. Otherwise I wouldn't be sitting here talking to you. But yeah, I'm the whole concept of what I did was just so much research, and I have been looking at this for quite some time. So, you know, and I've been trying to help other cancer patients for years. I've been looking to get off-label drug cocktails for other patients with different types of cancer. And I knew that they all had this different metabolic phenotype, that they all fueled themselves a little bit differently and respond a little bit differently to different cocktails. So you do need to understand the basic triangle of my Metromat. And the fuel lines that it uses, and you know, there are lots of natural alternatives as well in my, particularly my second edition. But you know, it's Berberine was absolutely critical for me, but then metformin would block an awful lot of those pathways as well. I used an antiplatelet drug called dipridamol, which blocks the SREBP2. That's a cholesterol pathway. So I used two things to block two cholesterol pathways. So I blocked the methylate pathway, which is what statins do, and then I blocked the SREBP2 pathway, which is what the dipridamol does. And because it couldn't make cholesterol, every cancer cell needs to make cholesterol blobs on its surface. Otherwise, it's not a cancer cell. It does need to have those cholesterol blobs. So if it can't make those cholesterol blobs, it just withers away. All right, and that's part of why my cocktail works for me. Not everybody can get dipridamol. Luteolin is a good natural alternative to that. But you know, it's very it becomes a personal thing to, and a kind of, most people, once they start learning about it, actually get really into it, and they really enjoy learning about it.
I found the same thing.
It's a weird thing. But you know, and I think it's so empowering to know, to actually understand what it is you're dealing with.
Yes, we talk a lot about our channel is called Beat Cancer with Me, and you know, we're learning, just so that everyone knows, I was a YouTube guy before I got cancer, and so making videos and going live was very natural for me, and like many people who beat stage 4 cancer, I want to share with everyone how to do that. But we started to ask ourselves, what does it mean to beat cancer? in the beginning, for me, it was like full remission, never appears on a scan. That's what I was going for. And I still, that's my marathon goal. But what I've learned is that managing cancer is a very powerful place to be. And I could, just like a person could live with half a leg, a very fulfilling life, I could live a very fulfilling and long life with a couple of tumors inside of me. Where I feel the most power is that I don't fear cancer. I'm not afraid of it erupting in my body. If my diet gets out of whack, I'll fast. You know, if I slip or it starts to grow, which it's not even like really even showing up on the CTs right now, then I know what to do. And that is so powerful. Also, I know who to trust. And so when I go to I don't even see my oncologist anymore because I do have to go in 6 months for scans, but that's the only thing I need them for. And I know that she's going to give me some garbage information. I know, when she talks about keto, she always talks about the keto diet, and which tells me to her it's about weight loss and it's about like a trend. It's not about an actual metabolic process that starves cancer cells. She has no idea. She told us this. She said, if you guys send me articles, then I'll read them. And my wife and I sent her 5 or 6 articles. She never even opened those emails. No. And so knowing who to trust and where to go was for us a major victory over cancer. And I think that's part of what you're doing is you're empowering people. My good friend and thymoma thriver, Kaylee Moynihan, asked a great question. And I'm going to kind of generalize this question so it hits the most amount of people. But where do we go, Jane, to learn our own cancers, especially when you have something like thymoma, which is very rare in the United States? Not a lot of stuff being done on it. Like, how does one research their own cancer? Where do we go?
Right. Okay. First up, you need to understand those fuel lines and what actually feeds it. So those critical pathways that go into my MetroMap are kind of like your key. And once you understand what those are, and you don't have to necessarily understand what mTOR is or what mevalonate is or even what autophagy is. What you need to do is look for, so once you understand that those are the fuel pathways that you need to look out for, you can type in metabolic phenotype of thymoma into Google or PubMed, you just look up metabolism of your particular cancer, and then you'll come across, once you're familiar with those terms, you might not understand what they are necessarily, but once you see mTOR, it uses mTOR, then you know, great, well, I'll stick metformin in there or berberine, or and you can then build up your cocktail knowing, but you need that basic level of understanding about metabolism, and unfortunately it means becoming a little bit more familiar with the terminology on my MetroMap. And that's why people get very scared about it to start with, because it's like learning a different language. It really is.
It was hard.
It's foreign. Yeah. And, I think the medical profession like to have lots of weird language so that they sort of keep it a bit mysterious.
Yes, jargon to keep it secret society. Yeah, totally.
Yeah. So, but yeah, you have to have some weird names for some of this stuff. But it's just a matter of being familiar with it, and the more you look at it, the more you understand it. I don't fully understand what mTOR does particularly, but I just know it's like a switchboard, and it sort of gathers the proteins together and creates, and it's a trigger for
muscle growth. For growth.
Yeah. So that it is. It's so that's a really critical pathway to block, and they found that blocking that alongside chemo, it's one of the critical pathways that really affects every cancer. No question about it. mTOR is a really big one you need to block. Glycolysis is a big one, and oxphos. You need to block them both, not just one. You need to block them both. If you block one, it'll just use the other one instead. They compensate for each other. You block one, then it'll just use more of the other. So you have to block, and it's about these pairs. So if you block the mTOR, that's starving the cancer. So the cancer goes, oh, I better get some nutrients from somewhere else, and it pulls it in with this process of autophagy. So you need to be blocking autophagy and mTOR together. So I've worked out these kind of pairs of pathways that tend to work together, and it's important that you kind of grasp that you know, and this is why we're not getting the cures, because we're not looking at blocking these synergistic pairings properly. We're just ignoring that. You know, traditional oncology doesn't recognize even the metabolism yet properly.
Right.
You know, most oncologists haven't got the faintest clue.
They never heard about it. And so I tell people, look, your doctor's not evil. Your doctor doesn't know. You know, I tell people all the time, look, I'm not against my doctor, but she's not responsible for my life, right? So it's not like I think my doctor's this big evil, like chemo salesperson, although there might be an element of that built into the hospital system. I see my doctor as somebody who worked really hard in school, using books that were written decades before she was even in school. And she became a doctor after 12 years, got overwhelmed with patients. She doesn't have time to read all the newest studies, especially when you're in a place that, let's face it, there's no money to be made on fasting. There's no money to be made on berberine. So why would a business like the hospital explore non-profitable routes? It's when we start to think of the hospital as a charity. It's not a charity, guys. The hospitals don't exist for altruistic reasons. They're businesses. And when you know that, people become less evil, and it's not about a big conspiracy. It's about a system, and you've got to take responsibility for your own health. In your book, we put links to all this stuff down below. Do you have a few more minutes? I know that you're traveling.
I'm fine.
Okay. Talk to us a little bit of.
I'm flying off to Detroit tomorrow, so I'm talking at a conference. In fact, I'll be talking to about, I don't know how many doctors, but you know, predominantly a conference for integrative doctors. So that's fabulous.
Fantastic.
You know, it's the first time I've spoken in person to anybody for about 2.5 years.
How do you get received at these events? Not like you're a physiotherapist. How are you received at these events, being like not a licensed or like degree holding doctor?
This is actually the first time I'll be talking to doctors, but interestingly, I was approached by them. They were looking for speakers, and apparently I was, from all the doctors, I was the top person they wanted to speak. So, you know, they obviously want me, so I'll take that, and I'll hopefully they won't boo and hiss when I go up on the stage.
My doctor is excited. I told my doctor I was interviewing you, and he got so excited. You know, he's got your book in the lobby along with Dr. Nasha's book, and I think that that's very exciting. You know, it kind of goes back for me, like you go to the community where the people have what you want. If you want to be a successful entrepreneur, you don't hang out with steel workers. It's not that steel workers are bad, that you don't want what they have. If you want to beat cancer, I had somebody reach me the other day and was just expressing all of this. I barely know her, a friend of a friend, and she's just pouring out, I just got diagnosed and all these things. And I asked her, what's your goal? Is your goal to thrive through chemo, or is your goal to find an alternative method? And I just, that question alone caused her to kind of really examine. Her doctor's whole thing was eat chocolate and enjoy the chemo process as much as you can, where we want to introduce people to a whole nother lifestyle.
Right. And my approach really is to try and make those. So I don't necessarily want to take everybody off their traditional treatments. I don't think that's the right approach. What I want to do is make those traditional treatments work better. And it's very important to try and support the patient. Very often patients, I mean, they don't want to come off their treatments either, mostly. I mean, it's very brave to actually come off chemo and just totally rely on alternative stuff. And it's a big leap of faith. Because you do want to get rid of some of those fast dividing cells. No question, chemo will help that. Yes, most patients, particularly stage 4, if they're given chemo, they are overdosed with it. No question, you know, and given high doses of chemo.
That's what they did to me. He pounded me with it.
With stage 4. Anyway, but So I'd much rather have that greater, or patients have that greater cocktail of off-label drugs, of supplements, of the dietary info, and also use exercise, something I haven't talked about, but that's one of my 4 pillars in my protocol is exercise as well. And you can use exercise in the starve protocol, and you do that by going for a walk, brisk walk after you've eaten your meal for about 20 minutes after you've eaten. You don't need to do a huge amount. You're just pulling the glucose out of the system, out of your blood, into your muscles, so it's not going to your cancer.
Yeah.
And the other thing I discuss is, I particularly in my online course, I discuss exercise in more detail, but I discuss the HIIT approach, so high intensity exercise. And what you're trying to do is oxygenate, and that's kind of part of my kill phase protocol, is that pro-oxidant HIIT. And I think a lot of people with stage 4 need more of that pro-oxidant HIIT to kind of kill off what's going on in the cancer cell, because it's much more effective at killing off an awful lot more of the cancer cell, particularly the fast dividing cell, and the cancer stem cells as well. But it sort of eradicates much quicker than the starve thing can actually work. And if you don't have that much of an aggressive cancer, you can just stick to the starve phase. But if you have a more aggressive cancer, I do strongly suggest you use something like intravenous vitamin C, something that's actually going to really pro-oxidate.
Yeah, I do intravenous vitamin C.
Yeah, oh God, yes, I use intravenous.
I do intravenous vitamin C 4 times a month. I was just talking to Kaylee about it, and Kaylee actually had a great question. So I do intravenous vitamin C, and I do artemisinin or artemisate, all the things that you mentioned, and it's all being done by a local doctor who I found out about through the Care Oncology Clinic. And so going through Care Oncology, they were a big resource for me, and like where I go next. Here's a kind of an interesting question. Let's say 2 people have the same cancer. Can those cancers react differently? Can their pathways be different? And I'm assuming she means in major ways. Or, what are your thoughts on that?
I would say there are typical phenotypes for every single type of cancer, but you've also got to be aware of the mutations. So, for example, if you have a BRAF mutation, it'll prefer ketone. It will actually like to feed on ketones. So you need to know what your mutations are. It's worth having your genomics tested, those molecular pathways as well. So it's worth just
test. What test is that?
Foundation 1. There are quite a few of them. Tempus, Caris. I've got a list of lots of tests. At the beginning of my online course, I kind of give people.
Got it. So it's like needle biopsy type stuff, right? Like I had a full resection. They took one of my tumors out. I started with 9, by the way. And now I have 1 that even is of any issue. And that's, you got to remember, my doctors told me that there was no chance of that happening. No, he said less than 1%. Those were the actual words he used. So this stuff works if you work it. It was not easy, Jane, but I'll tell you, now I'm doing high intensity workouts. The HIT, like this is a new thing for me. I feel like I have more energy, and I have restructured my life to spend more time with my kids, right? Like when you get this diagnosis and this idea, I'm not going to be with my kids anymore. It made me reframe how I want to live my life. And so after dinner, I was getting kind of ticked off doing these long workouts when they're going to bed, so I switched to this 20-minute after dinner thing, and that's just, they'll even walk on the treadmill with me. And so
or you go for a walk around the block. Just take them I do that with my kids sometimes in the evenings. We just go for a little walk around the block with them.
Well, and we live in an area that
family thing,
Yeah, absolutely. And the snow just melted where I live, so we weren't doing any outside walks. I bought a neat little $300 treadmill that fits under a desk, and so it's very, very small, and that's where I go. It's like in the downstairs there. It doesn't take up a lot of room, but it's like I eat dinner, I go and I do a little walking on there, and I'm doing all those things that you say need to be done. And I think that's it's powerful how if you build up a routine, an anti-cancer lifestyle, it becomes less of this like high impact boxing match where you're like, what's the latest scan? How do I feel today? What's that? Oh my, I have a sore throat. Does that mean, is it spreading? What's going? When you just adopt an anti-cancer lifestyle, it's like an exponential buildup, and you don't even feel like you're beating cancer anymore. You're just living anti-cancer.
I didn't even, you know, when I was taking my cocktail of off-label drugs, I had no idea they were going to get rid of my cancer. That was, to me, you know, it was phenomenal that my cancer disappeared. So it was a complete leap of faith, and I didn't feel any side effects. I didn't feel anything, you know. So the statin and dipridamol, I took a strong non-steroidal called Metabolic. Might have damaged my stomach a little bit, but I was doing that cocktail. Didn't fit, you know. I felt absolutely fine, and yet, you know, my markers were initially way high, and then suddenly 7 months, and it took 7 months, and nothing there. And it was, you know, it was like I wasn't actually, you know, unlike chemo, unlike some of these immunotherapies, which can make you feel so nauseous and so poorly, you know. I mean, actually, these treatments are horrendous, really.
They are.
But my point is to try and make all of these things work better. So if you're on immunotherapy, you need to know what you need to take in order to make it more effective. And that's the key to kind of like learning my system and learning. And there's a lot to it. I mean, I've got something like over 100 videos in my online course, so there's a heck of a lot of learning. But some of those are inspirational videos, some of those are YouTube clips of other things. But it's an amalgamation of knowledge.
And we actually need those things, you know, like if you don't believe you're going to survive, then you won't do the things you need to do. It's like you mentioned earlier, if you don't know why ketosis works, or if you don't know why berberine works, then you're less like with it. And I'm just showing you guys a look at what her course looks like. Can I share kind of a funny story? Like, so I told you when I first found your book, I was really depressed, and I was not in a place where I was that guy that had my wife going to the oncology appointments for me because I was not in a place to hear it. She read your book for me, and I posted on Instagram all the highlights and all the things, and those are all hers because my wife did all that work initially. When you came out with the course, it was right as I was sort of waking up to, I need to fight this myself. And the course changed everything for me. I love to read. I'm not anti-reading, but I also want the information. And so being able to just like watch these videos on my couch with my kids, teaching them how to beat cancer was a game changer. And so you guys should go get this course, even if you have the book. And truly, it's only $97. So I think you should buy the course for someone you love that has cancer. Now, you may not know anybody right now, but I mean, just wait. Like I get hit up maybe 2-3 times a week from a friend who has cancer, or a friend whose friend has cancer, right? A loved one has cancer. Yeah. I say, look, I could teach you I could tell you, I'll go get the course. And that way they're hearing a more intellectual argument, you know, on why they should do these things. Cause I'm a lot of just spunk and fire. Like, you gotta do this. It's a little overwhelming. Yeah. No, it's true.
I know.
It's easy. I'm a video guy, you know, by trade. But we've got to wrap up because I've got to jump off and do my next thing. And I'm so bummed. I like to do back-to-back appointments and then take the afternoons kind of off. But I'm so enjoying this interview. Let's talk about mitochondria and the new sort of emerging science happening around mitochondria. I know you said you wanted to start with that. Talk to us about what's happening with mitochondria and what we need to know.
So initially, when you get cancer, it's caused by dysfunctional mitochondria. So this is why they start using, and the glycolysis becomes a thing, because that actually doesn't use the mitochondria at all. It's the outside. surrounding area that's producing the ATP. But actually part of that is because it reduces the free radicals. That's the reason that they thought it was for macromolecules and building the new daughter cells. Actually, it's because glycolysis produces less free radicals. And cancer is really susceptible to high levels of free radicals, which is where my ferroptosis comes in, and that pro-oxidant pulse. But the mitochondria will go through this. So this is what I was talking about earlier. It'll so two things you've got to know. You've got this reverse Wahlberg that goes on. So you've got mitochondria being will actually use lactate. So that's why they use the oxphos. And that's important to know that the mitochondria are functional. All cancer cells have despite the fact they have dysfunctional ones, they have very functional mitochondria that actually need to be blunted as well. So it's not just about blocking the dysfunctional ones and creating good ones. You actually need to be making sure that you use something like, that's why the doxycycline and berberine work particularly well, because they are like antibiotics, and the mitochondria are ancient bacteria. So you've got this reverse Wahlberg effect where lactate is coming from these cells producing, doing the glycolysis, and the neighboring cells are using that lactate for fuel, converting it to pyruvate, and then it's going into the Krebs cycle, which is the normal ATP cycle that every cell will use.
Right.
But your cancer cells are much hungrier. You can starve these ones quite happily. Everybody takes antibiotics all the time.
Mm-hmm.
They're not dying because they're blunting off the oxphos. People get very worried about taking antibiotics and if you block the oxphos, aren't we all going to die? No, most healthy cells will actually go through a period of starvation and will deal with this. They're used to dealing with stressful conditions. That's what they're kind of conditioned to do. But the cancer cell is far more vulnerable, and this is the key: is that we need to be blocking that, and we also need to be blocking this biogenesis of these new mitochondria. It produces lots more mitochondria than the healthy cell because it needs to produce all this energy, and that is what cancer is. It's just an energy making machine. And that's the point, is we need to blunt that and actually knock that back so that we can actually, and Professor Lisanti proved that with a lot of his research, that actually once you've got that under control, you control the cancer. It doesn't control you.
Yeah.
And that's the key.
Is that where fenbendazole and mebendazole come in?
Fenbendazole and mebendazole, they both have multiple effects. So they work on something called the Wnt pathway, which is implicated particularly in things like colorectal cancer, really critically important for those. It's one of my top recommendations actually for colorectal cancer, and something called APC. And so it works on that. It's also like they stop something called the microtubules in the cells. So they act very much like a chemotherapy drug called vincristine. So they work for that as well. So they're kind of like a cheap kind of chemo.
Yeah.
And they block some of the what's known as MMPs. These are growth factors. All right. So it blocks MMP2 and 9. And so that's some of the ways that the cancer cell learns to break down the matrix around the cell and spread and metastasize. So it actually helps to block the metastasis of these cells as well. So it has multiple effects.
I loved that part of your strategy, which was like stop the spread, right?
Yeah.
And then it was shrink the tumor, and then it's like kill it with ferroptosis. It's something like that.
Something like that.
But I wrote it on my mirror. For those of you, I want everyone to go get a black dry erase marker and put it next to every mirror in your house, because I would write the things that I heard you say on the videos, I'm shaving, and I'd write it on, and I wrote that down, and I looked at it every single day, and that became sort of like my stepping stones for what I'm trying to do right now. Because sometimes it feels like you're doing a lot, right? It's like I have to go to the doctor and get IV vitamin C, and then it's like I have to go get my follow-up scans, and then I have a follow-up with the doctor. Like, it feels like a lot, but you've really got to know, what are you working on right now, right? Like, stop the spread or whatever the case might be.
Yeah, I've got quite a lot of people that I talk to who have read my book and stuff. They actually have, I mean, it's funny, they put pieces of paper up on their walls everywhere.
Yes.
You know.
I could show you. I could show you in my living room. You know, we teach our kids too, because we have kids that are under 10, but we don't tell them. We tell them, you're never going to get cancer unless you don't learn from what dad did wrong, right? High stress lifestyle, dependent on pharmaceuticals, you know, whatever the doctor told me I'm good with. And then food. I had a horrible diet back in the day. So by having these things on the wall, words like ferroptosis, like I put ferroptosis ? Don't know what it means. Something to do with iron, right?
Yeah.
But I put it up on the wall, causes me to Google. By the way, guys, I don't use Google. I use DuckDuckGo, because Google will give you the American Cancer Society and all the mainstream corporate results. If like, I'd go directly to PubMed or start on DuckDuckGo. But by having those in front of you, it reminds you of what it is that you should be working on, what you should learn about, and that's very empowering. Okay, we've got to go, but I wanna recognize Adnan, who asked this question multiple times. He's been very patient. Is there anything, Jane, you can say about iron deficiency anemia in cancer patients? Do's, don'ts, things to be aware of, anything like that?
Yeah, obviously you need to have, it's very hard, because actually at a certain point, the cancer is actually pulling the iron into itself. So it's actually depleting you. But you don't want the iron going into the cancer. You want to keep the iron for yourself. So things like IPC, lactoferrin, and vitamin C will actually help, you know, get the iron into you for you, rather than the cancer cells. Lots of garlic. Garlic is really critical as well. That's one of the reasons I think that garlic is so useful, because it has this effect on the iron, and it creates more free labile iron, and that's the iron that's actually going to react with things like those pro-oxidants that, you know, we want, like the intravenous vitamin C or H-bot, or, you know, ozone, or whatever you're using to create that oxygenation pulse. That's kind of react with, and that's why garlic, I think, is one of the reasons that garlic is so spectacular for cancer patients.
I bought an H-bot, and I would encourage you guys, if you have, I mean, it's going to cost you $5 or $6 grand, but it doesn't take up any more room than a kid's bed. And summittosea.com, they just raised their prices, but they're still far lower than the other hyperbaric places. So Summit to Sea is a great resource for buying a hyperbaric chamber. I bought one with an oxygen compressor. I try to go in it 3-4 times a week. You know, even this morning I woke up at 5. I couldn't go back to sleep, but I want my 8 hours. So I went into the chamber, fell back asleep again, and woke up just in time for this interview. Just kidding. Jane, it's been wonderful having you today. Tell everybody where they can go to learn more, to follow you, and to stay in touch with you.
Okay, sign up to my blog, which is on my website somewhere. You might have to go to the bottom of the first page to find it. I'm changing my website. It's a bit of a mess at the moment. So hopefully I'll have a new website out in a few weeks' time. But yeah, my blog is on there somewhere. Right, yeah, if you go right down to the bottom of the first page, I think it says sign up for my newsletter. There you go, right at the bottom. But my website has got everything on there, from my online course to, you know, getting hold of my book. It's on Amazon as well. But if you buy it direct from me, I get a little bit more. And I'm not, you know, I've not backed the price anyway. I mean, it's not exactly expensive for you know.
No, it's ridiculous, actually. That's why I recommend guys to buy the course. And if somebody you know gets cancer, consider buying the course for them. You know, one of the things that I did originally was I gave everyone books on metabolic therapy. And I told them, you're not allowed to say anything about cancer other than victory. And like, none of this, Owen, I'm so sorry. Like, you're not going to feel sorry for me. We're just going to beat cancer. And what happened was the people around me started to believe as well. And then now they're throwing ideas. Like, my mom started making vegan dishes. She made sure she had keto food in the house. And so when we'd go to visit and those types of things, really building that community. We'll put all the links in the description box for anybody who is watching this on the replay. I'm sorry we didn't get to everybody's questions, but I hope maybe we can do this again. And we can answer even more questions. Jane, it's been a pleasure. I hope that this is only the first time.
Thank you so much. That was brilliant. Okay.
Awesome. All right, guys, we'll see you next time. Thanks so much for being here with us today.